joining us, and please do introduce yourself in the chat for us to know who we all have, what counties you're from. That would be super helpful if you guys could do that. And I am Cassidy Martin. I am the Meeker County Extension Educator. And again, we have the team from last night are with us again too, but tonight's the night that I kind of am in charge of the presentation today. So let's see here. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys, this right here, this document, I did make this up if you wanted to use it. It's a Google Doc. So if you have the capability and want to make a copy of that document to put notes in it for yourself, you can do that. It also has some links that are some helpful resources when we get to the end. Share something that you are nervous or excited about for this year, for in your role as a reporter. I see, getting to learn more about 4-H offices. That is exciting. Something to look forward to. Thank you for sharing that. Excited to be able to document the events of 4-H. That is awesome. I really like that you guys are excited to document our story. Ooh, putting things in the newspaper. It is, I don't know about you guys, but I was always super excited to see my name in a newspaper. It was such a big rush when I was younger and didn't really understand how all that worked. Typing more articles. Cool. Excited to help with the scrapbook. Okay, awesome. So we do have somebody who's helping with scrapbook too. Recording club events. Awesome. So those are some great answers, guys, and I'm glad you're excited to share those stories. We have a special guest with us tonight. Jay Olsted is a former Emmy-winning TV reporter and anchor who now helps others find and tell their best stories. So I'm going to actually let him introduce himself a little bit, and then we're going to talk with him about his experiences and ask him some questions.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in front of all of you, even though we're not in person. I'm getting used to these Zoom calls, that's for sure. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully that works. So I have a few slides that I was going to show you all. Let's see if I can do that. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
You see my ugly mug up there, ×4? Okay. So this is a kind of a miniature presentation because I give this type of presentation to a lot of companies who want to learn more about the power of storytelling. And if you become a journalist, or many of you want to be a reporter for 4-H, it's the same thing. You're telling stories, you're finding facts, you're finding information, you're finding people to talk to, and you're telling a story. And that to me is my biggest passion. I feel like I was born to tell stories. So who the heck is this guy? Who am I? Well, Cassidy kind of talked a little bit about it, but I spent nearly 20 years in radio and television news. I was in radio for about 2 years, and then spent the rest of my 16 years in TV news, going all over the country. I started in Billings, Montana. I then went to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and from there went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then finished up my career in broadcasting here in Minneapolis, where I was a general assignment and investigative reporter at KARE 11 for about 6 or 7 years. And I just left there maybe about 2-3 years ago. And I transitioned out of TV news and became kind of more of a reporter, but for business, for I guess you could call a brand storyteller for corporations and nonprofit groups. And some of the other things that I also do, I co-own a video production company and also do talks like this. And so in the grand scheme of things, I guess you can call me just flat out, I'm a storyteller. So what does that mean? Well, my lifelong dream was being a journalist. And that picture you see on, well, it's my left, so I don't know, the little kid with the tux, that's me I'm about 5 or 6 years old. And even then, at that age, as shy as I was, and I was incredibly shy, and I still sometimes am shy, but I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to be on television or on radio. I don't know why. For some reason, that was just something I enjoyed watching and listening and doing. And as I got older, the picture on the right of that is me. Probably this is, gosh, late 80s. I'm ancient, aren't I? And I was probably, I don't know, 10, 11 years old there, and I was pretending to be a news anchor for KARE 11. I grew up here in the Twin Cities, and you might be able to see that picture there. I have a little 11 pin, and they used to wear the 11 pin back in the 80s, and I was so obsessed with television news that I wrote my favorite news anchor at the time was Paul Majors, and I wrote him a letter and drew him a picture, and he sent me his picture back, and he sent me that KARE 11 pin, which I still have. I actually wore it on my last broadcast at KARE 11. So ever since I was a young kid, I wanted to be a journalist. And some of the things that I really loved about being a journalist were I was curious. I still am curious about everything. I loved writing, really enjoyed writing and weaving a story. And even as a really, really shy kid, I enjoyed talking and telling people stories. So that was my lifelong dream, and it came true. So about 6 or 7 years ago, well, even more now, about close to 10 years ago, I got a job at KARE 11. So when I was pretending as a kid, it actually came true, and that's what I did. And so my job at KARE 11 was a reporter, a general assignment reporter, and an investigative reporter. So I wore kind of two different hats. A general assignment reporter is someone who comes in that day and is on TV that night. So I worked the night, quote unquote, night shift. So I worked the 10 o'clock news. And so I'd come in around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would get assigned a story. Sometimes I would have the story ideas. Other times it was assigned to me, and then it was up to me and my photographer to go out and find the story and have it ready for the 10 o'clock news. So that's the general assignment reporter, but I also was an investigative reporter. And so I did the investigating maybe 40%, 30% of the time, and the rest was general assignment. So when I was an investigative reporter, oftentimes I would be the one who would be digging through documents and trying to reveal stories and discover stories that had a lot of implication for the community and that sort of thing. And so sometimes I would be investigating a story for weeks, months. One, I remember I was on it for a year. And so that's something I would do on the side as well. And that was a lot of fun too, because I got to take more time with the story and travel places, and it was a lot of fun. So I wanted to play a story. I have about 3 of them, but I'm thinking maybe I'll do one for now, and then if we have time, maybe I'll play some more. But this is a story that I did when I was at KARE 11. I play this not only for journalism students that I sometimes coach, but also for corporations and businesses for various reasons. There's a lot of learning that comes from it. But the reason I wanted to play this for you, and it goes to the power of storytelling. I just looked on this story the other day. It's been viewed nearly 35 million times. And I say that not to brag. I say that because that's what social media and the internet has done. Is when I first started back in the late 90s and early 2000s, a story would air and it would go away. It didn't take on another life. But now, as you all know, a lot of times you tell a story and it can live forever on the internet. And this was a story that I thought myself and my photographer did a good job with, but certainly I wouldn't say it's one of my best stories. But for a number of reasons why I think it resonated, it resonated, and it was picked up all over the place, and 35 million people have watched it, and it brought them some information, but also brought them some joy. And at the end of the day, as a reporter, my job is not just to inform people, but it also is to make them think and hopefully make them feel. Because at the end of the day, that's what storytelling does. And that's what being a journalist can do. You can really connect people and help them understand the world in which they live. So I'm going to play this. I'll give you a quick little, a quick preview, I guess, synopsis of what this story is all about. And then I'll probably want you to, if you haven't, mute your phones. But this was a story about a little boy. So earlier on the day, both these people you see on the screen, they served in the military. And the woman just got back from a long tour. I want to say it was Afghanistan. I know the story says it, and we had a camera there from Care 11 earlier in the day. And she's been gone for several months. They come in, she's at attention with the rest of her unit. And normally how this happens, and many of you probably know about this, is there's a military protocol. Their commanding officer lets them go, and then the family come and they all hug. Well, this woman's son, who was younger, didn't want to wait any longer. He had enough of waiting, and he just burst over and ran to her. And we caught it on camera, posted it on Facebook, and it blew up. People loved it. It warmed their heart. And so when I got into the news station that afternoon, they had already decided what my story was, to find out the story behind the story, to find out who's this little boy, who's this mother, and what's their story. So that's what we did. And we found them, and the rest is history. So we'll play this, and then I'll give a little backstory, and would love to answer any questions that you might have too, but I'll continue after this. So why don't we watch this, and then we'll talk after.
At his home in Little Falls, 3-year-old Cooper Wadvogel is used to waiting.
He's the definition of resiliency, that's for sure.
He's waited a long time for this moment with his parents.
It's good to be home.
His mother, Catherine, has waited too.
I was longing to hold him. That's all that I thought about.
Just this morning, she returned home after serving in Afghanistan with the National Guard's 114th Transportation Company. She'd been apart from her son for 9 months.
All of a sudden, we had to file into the building and get information. And I, just look up, and Cooper and my mom are right there.
But Cooper, well, he'd waited long enough.
He just kept smiling like he was in awe of me.
A moment captured by a Care 11 photographer posted on our Facebook page.
Like this one, it just says that was probably the most tear-jerking and humbling 26 seconds I've seen in a long time.
With tens of thousands of people commenting and liking the post.
It melts my heart. It's so great.
But this wasn't the first time little Cooper and his family here in Little Falls had to wait.
He kind of did the same thing for me.
Cooper's dad and Catherine's husband, Adam, returned from serving in Afghanistan with the National Guard back in December.
I can't even imagine that she's home right now.
Adam and Catherine haven't seen each other in 19 months. That means Cooper has been without his parents in the same house for more than a third of his life. So you can understand why he wants it to last as long as possible.
We play all day.
Jay Olstead, Care 11 News.
Yeah, we can play all day. What do you want to play with next?
Little Falls.
Whoops, hold on.
Mission to
So I forgot to mute my mic, so hopefully you're still able to hear that okay. I love that story, not because of anything that I did, but because of the characters. And it's interesting, the reason why I play that story for some of the corporations and businesses I talk to is because my photographer and I had roughly a half hour with that family, and then we had to drive another 45 minutes back to the station. And so I wrote that script in about 10 minutes. And the only reason I was able to do all that, not because of my skill set, but in large part because I was knew what the focus of that story was right off the top. And so we knew going in kind of what that story was all about. But we decided what the focus was, and my photographer said, you know what, I think the focus is waiting. That's the focus, the little boy waiting. And so the correlation is it's so important to really understand what your story is all about. Otherwise, you're going to confuse people. So what I wanted to quick show you before I wrap it up and answer some of your questions is there was a question that one person had about the elements and components of creating a compelling story. Now, there's a structure I follow, and most storytellers follow it, whether they're journalists, whether they're TV producers, whether they're writers of books, movie directors. They all kind of follow that same pattern. But the three things that I always look for elements are focus, a strong focus, having some moments that keep the viewer or the listener or the reader keep their attention, and then finally characters. So in that story we just watched before, the strong focus, so I was able to really distill that story down to one sentence in my head, or even just one word, and that word was waiting. And then that allowed us then to realize all these great moments that we had, the moments where, of course, the video of little Cooper running to his mom, and then the reaction and the mom reacting to the reaction on Facebook. And then you have the moment where, and I didn't know this going in, I didn't know that Dad was also in the military and he was gone. And so because I was focused on that waiting, I knew that that could be a great moment in the story. And then at the end, when he says, I want to play all day, that's a wonderful moment that I knew that had to be at the end. So those are some moments that keeps people's attention. And then, of course, to have some great characters, people that you can relate to, people that you know and see. So I look at that mom, and my next door neighbor is that mom, or that little boy reminds me of my son. All these people that can really humanize your story. You always need people, because that's the whole point. One little tidbit, I don't know if you're probably too young to know what 60 Minutes is, but it's a news magazine show. And there's this great quote by the guy who started it. And it's a very highly rated, people watch this still to this day. And someone asked him, how do you get so many people watching 60 Minutes when you do stories on issues, boring stuff? And he said, well, no, we don't do stories on issues. We do stories on people dealing with issues. And that, to me, is the heart of any good story, is the human element. So I have a couple other videos, but what I might do is just do a little time check here. And I can play those in a little bit if we still have time, but I definitely want to answer your questions as well. But I'll leave with this, and then if we go back to some of those stories, I'd be happy to do that. But this is a quote that I always have. It's on my home office here, and it really comes down to those who tell stories rule the world. It's an African-American proverb. And what it really is saying is those who can communicate well, who can communicate their story, but even more importantly, tell someone else's story, have wonderful power. Good power, power to change the world in a positive way, to shine the light on someone's story, to be a voice for the voiceless, to listen to someone who's never been heard before. You have that power as a journalist, as a reporter, as a storyteller. And that should never be taken lightly. To me, that's a privilege. Even now that I'm out of news, what I get to do, I still tell people stories and do it in a video format, but I still tell people stories. And the thing that I love so much about telling stories and being really a journalist is I get to be portaled, transferred out of my life and into someone else's almost every day. And what that teaches me is understanding, compassion, empathy. I get to understand what other people are dealing with. As a journalist, I went into neighborhoods I never even realized existed. I saw all walks of life. And it really taught me and opened my eyes to the world in which I lived and helped me understand the world better. And that's really the power of being a good storyteller, but that's the power of being a reporter, a storyteller, a journalist. So that's what I have. I do have, I have some other questions here that maybe I can answer. And then if we have time, I can certainly play some more videos. But one of the questions that was asked, what has been your favorite story to tell and why? That is very tough, because when I think back, I've told stories now for 20 years and about 18 or so years in broadcasting. So if you figure at that, I've probably told thousands upon thousands of stories. I can think maybe one of my first memories of one of my first real stories was when I was in Billings, Montana, and I got to fly in a helicopter up and landed on the side of a mountain in eastern Montana, following along paleontologists who had discovered this huge T-Rex dinosaur in the mountains. So I remember we were flying in this helicopter and we landed, and I could see the skeleton of this big dinosaur, and they were using their tools to get all the dust off. And I thought I was like 22 years old, so I had no business being anywhere. And I'm thinking, wow, what a job I have. This is so fun. So that's one story. There's so many other stories that I can think of. I went down to the Mexican border and did a story on the Mexican border and things going across it and how it impacted Minnesota. I flew to Texas. I flew with World War II veterans to Washington, D.C., who saw their memorial for the first time. These are just some of the stories I got to tell. I interviewed when I was in radio. I interviewed George W. Bush, governor at the time, as he was running for president, and he later became president. I've interviewed secretaries of states and governors and senators, and the thing that I love the most of the interviews I got to tell are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Those are the stories that really I was heartened by, because to me it showed that we all have that hero inside of us to do some great things. One last question I'll answer, and then I'll leave it up to everybody else. One person, if you're a young person and you're interested in pursuing this line of work, what advice would you give to them? If I would say this, if you truly want to be a reporter or a broadcaster or a journalist, I would pay attention, read the newspaper, watch the news, listen to the radio, try to find someone that you think, oh, they're pretty good at what they do, and try to emulate them. What do they do that you like? But then as you get older, especially in high school, then into college or whatever you do, if you truly want to get into this field, start doing it. I mean, for me, growing up, I didn't have YouTube. I didn't have social media. I didn't have the capability of even creating my own website. You all can do that now. You can start your own newscasts, do your own reporting. You can use YouTube or kids YouTube, or start your website. When I was in high school, I started working at a radio station. And then from there, I got a job at a radio station as a news anchor when I was in college. And I learned probably more there than I did when I was in school. And I went to school for broadcast journalism, and I probably learned more. I don't tell my parents this because they helped pay for college, but I probably wasted some money. But nonetheless, get involved, start doing it, because if you truly want to do this, you have the tools to start your own newscast. That my daughter really wants to get into reporting. And so she started her own newscast, and she reports on things about what we're doing and what our neighborhood's doing, especially for my parents and some of my family. We can't really see very much right now because of the pandemic, and she's loving that. You all can do that, and it's great fun. So I'll stop talking, and I'll answer any questions, and if we have time, I certainly can play more stories too. But thank you for listening.
Do you guys have any questions for Jay that you really wanted to ask real briefly before we start talking about some of the other nuts and bolts stuff that we wanted to for the reporter position?
I don't think we have anything.
Thank you, Ryan. Others of you, anybody have any questions? It's not very often you get to have someone with this kind of experience to be able to ask these questions of.
Did you like your job as a news reporter? Did you think it was cool?
I did. I loved my job as a news reporter. It was I had the chance to be in a front row seat to history every day. Some days were harder than others.
Did you ever?
Yeah, go ahead, babe.
Did you ever get to be with someone or interview on the news, like mention someone on the news who has a disability? Because I have cerebral palsy myself.
Yes, I interviewed a lot of people who had disabilities, and all those people were doing extraordinary things, big things in their lives, and teaching me a whole lot. And it goes back to my point before, what I loved about my job and what I love about my job right now is I got to meet so many interesting people.
Were
Great.
people in wheelchairs?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, there were. I remember one interview when I was in Green Bay. I interviewed a child who was in a wheelchair who was raising a lot of money, and he raised about, I don't know, $20,000 to $30,000 for a charity. And so I remember that as well. But I loved my job as a TV news reporter. The big thing, the reason why I left really wasn't because of my lack of love for the job. It was I had two little ones at home that I wanted to be a little more present in their lives. Two kids. So now I still get to do a lot of things I love about journalism. And now I just get to see my kids a little bit more.
You have to travel a lot.
You can. Yeah, you can. I mean, certainly not right now. Reporters aren't traveling a whole lot, but there are times where I remember I went, like I said, I went to, in about a 6-month period, I went to the Arizona and the border, and I was down at the border for a week, flew back, and then not long after I went up to the northern border and did a story there, and then flew over to North Dakota and did a story there. And then I think that was the 3 or 4 month thread where I went from the border back up to the northern border to North Dakota and then back down to Texas. And that was back in, I don't know if you guys remember Adrian Peterson. He played for the Minnesota Vikings. There was a case involving him down in Florida that I went to, flew down there. So I felt like I was a national correspondent for a little bit. But then there are times where you don't travel as much and you stick close to the Twin Cities or your viewing area. But I certainly at KARE 11, I traveled a lot throughout the whole state. These are great questions.
If anybody has one more, we can take one more, and then we're going to move on to some other stuff that we're going to talk about. And if there's more time at the end, if we get through everything quick, we can ask some more questions of Jay if he's going to be staying on, or if he has to hop off, then that's okay too.
Yeah. If you have questions afterwards too, certainly you can email them, and I'm happy to answer them that way too.
All right, so I am going to, okay, so you guys can use the chat box to answer these questions. Or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that too. I want to hear what you guys learned or what you took away about storytelling. What kinds of things did you take away about storytelling today after listening to Jay?
Well, I want to be a broadcaster for the NFL on CBS, so this was really inspirational.
Awesome. That's a big aspiration. I like to hear that.
I don't think I want to be any reporter or broadcaster or anything, but it was nice learning all these things if I did want to do that.
Cool. Others of you? something you learned about storytelling, or any of these questions. If you want to answer any of these questions, what about our presentation? Our guest presentation, can you apply to your role as a 4-H reporter or a historian? Or what story do you want to tell now after hearing some of this? Learning the components that go into storytelling. That is a very good skill, regardless of if you're going to be a reporter or not. If any of you guys plan to go on to like college school, telling stories and reporting and writing reports, that's a big thing in any kind of schooling, really.
Do you remember what Jay said was one of the really important components, like the most important one? What was storytelling about? It was about who? Do you remember?
The people and not their issues. Well,
yeah, good, Greta. Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important. If you don't remember anything else, remember that it's important to focus on the people. And like Danielle said, the characters.
Because that makes a much more interesting story. I want to read about people. I don't really want to read about some of the other things that are issues.
That is true. It is about who and sometimes what, but the ones about the people are the good ones.
Exactly. And focusing on the moment to help tell the story about the year. I like that. That's a good reflection to help tell people stories. Awesome. So you guys have a voice in your jobs as reporters this year, or historians. As a reporter, you get to communicate about your club's value and the values to other people in your community. You get to tell and share the story of 4-H from your club's perspective. And it's about the people, right? So you can share about the people in your clubs and the things that your club is doing and the things that are important for your club. And as a historian, you actually get to craft the messages that people and the story that people will know about your club for years to come, because those scrapbooks, they actually live on, depending on where people store them. But we see those scrapbooks sometimes years and years and years later. And it's crazy when you look back on some of that stuff to see where people have been and what they were doing at that time and what was important to them, and some of the characters that come from some of those scrapbooks. So you have a voice in that. And I want you guys to, you can actually, we were going to do this on Annotate, but we're going to not. We're going to do it in the chat. So if you guys would share some of the things, I want you to brainstorm right now, activities that your club does over the course of the year that are things you could be reporting about. Ditch cleanups, yep. County fair, that's a big one for sure. We do a lot of things at county fair.
We have like themed meetings and stuff. Well, before the COVID, but we had themed meetings. So when we had a meeting, we'd have like an activity at the end that we did, and it was usually themed. Like sometimes it was a board game or decorating cookies and stuff.
Cool.
Christmas.
So your themes you could talk about and share about. I see tree planting. That's great. Service projects. You know, service projects can have a lot of characters in those stories, I think. Ooh, the horse show. Yep. If you're active in that project, for sure. Tie blankets and for families in need. This year, you have a lot of different things you can share about too. You can share about some of the unusual things that we've been doing. Scrapbooking. Cool. All right. What 4-Hers are, ooh, that would be a really cool story, sharing about what 4-Hers are working on for the fair. That would be so cool to see, like, in progress stuff. And I bet that there's a lot of people who would enjoy seeing and hearing about those stories.
We definitely would. like to see that. That would be a fun thing to see in the newspaper
That would be
every
really cool.
year.
Yeah, that would be great.
Volunteering at a food
Don't
shelf.
like to
Yep.
write. Even if you don't like to write for the newspaper, you could make your own YouTube video, right?
Yep.
They're all on devices right now. You could probably record a little report just like Jay had, and then maybe you post it to your club's Facebook account or send it to one of your adult leaders and they could share it. That would be so fun.
Or you could send it to one of us in your counties, for any of us that are your educators, and we can share those too. We have lots of resources to share those, and we like sharing those kinds of things. And that actually leads into the next question. What channels could you guys use to share your club's activities? When I say channels, I mean that a lot of times we traditionally do think about the newspaper as one of the avenues that we can share our 4-H story. But like Jay said, there's a ton of other opportunities and other places that we can share those things. What are some ideas that you guys have? You can put those in the chat box too. Where? Instagram, I see one. Other places we can share our story. What other channels?
Hey, Cassidy, Emma and Ellie actually, they've done multiple calls with Elizabeth for the radio.
Yeah.
Yep. Sharing on the radio is a great one. Yep. Facebook, I see. Social media, posters, other people. How many of your clubs have social media accounts? Email, Flipboard. Ooh, Flipboard is a cool one. I don't, or is that Flipgrid or is it Flipboard? I'm not familiar with Flipboard. We'll have to learn about that one maybe. Facebook, YouTube. Those are all great ideas. Okay, so it is Flipgrid. All right, perfect. Thank you. Schools, churches, virtually now. Yep. You guys could be guest speakers other places too. Sometimes other groups meet and do things and you can share your story there. I know sometimes some of us in our positions need some of that help, like talking to county boards or different committees to share about our 4-H experiences. Anybody have ideas about non-social media places? Radio was one I heard. And we've talked about, yep, newspapers. Sometimes there's newsletters that go out to people in places that aren't necessarily on social media. Mail, flyers, articles, yeah. If you are unsure about a place to share a story, you can talk to any one of your local educators and they will be happy to help you find a place to share your story. So I also wanted to share with you guys these lists of resources, because we're not going to go into all of these because I'll just give you a brief summary about what they can help you with. And then when we share the resources, and these were in that link. So if that document, if you were able to open it, you are able to click into each of these. But there are different things. So one of them is a calendar or like a planning guide that can help you kind of put together a plan for the year, because we do things in a year. And so you might have different stories that you want to tell throughout the course of the year. And if you put together a plan, it's usually a lot more successful for you to follow through on that plan if you actually have it like written down somewhere. If it's only in your head, you tend to forget about it. So if you can have a plan that you put together, if you want to use that tool, if that helps you, you can do that. Then there's an guide that can help you with outlining and writing an article. So if you need some help and you want to have some idea about how to structure your article, that tool can help you with that. We also shared a 4-H style guide, and that is to help you, because 4-H has a lot of words that are not necessarily words that everybody knows or everybody uses. So, and sometimes it's hard to remember how to write or spell out and use all those words. So it gives you some tools as to how to do that. Because like, I know I've seen articles and things where people are not as familiar with 4-H, and sometimes they use a 4 and then a lowercase h. and there's no dash and it's not capital, and it drives me crazy. So that can help you guys with some of those trickier words or trickier phrases and things that are 4-H kind of specific. But it also has some other stuff too to help with like titles, how to write titles and locations and things like that. There's also one that is interview questions. So for youth, and it's interview questions you can use if you want to interview another 4-H youth or volunteers. So that could be something that would be really helpful if you're looking for trying to get at those characters. Instead of just writing about your meeting, maybe you want to feature somebody in your meeting. So you can use that tool to help with questions. And then the last one is actually some example ideas. So it's things that I have access to that others have shared. So it's a lot of links to some of the stuff on my Meeker County 4-H page, Facebook page, because we've had some cool stuff that has been shared, and I wanted to give you guys ideas about other things you can do. So like featuring 4-H'er stories, or how to share, like if you want to share a picture and quotes about 4-H'ers, or there was one that was an alumni feature somebody had done about a former 4-H'er, because I bet some of your clubs have some of those people and can talk about how 4-H impacted them. And sometimes that's a cool story to share. So those are just ideas, nothing you would have to do, but just ideas to kind of give you sparks and move you forward. Uh-oh. I want to hear from you guys what you heard today that sparked your interest or gave you an idea that you want to try. And you can unmute if you want to share that way, or you can put in the chat.
It kind of want to makes me write more articles. And stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Interviewing former 4-H'ers.
Interviewing former 4-H'ers, that's awesome. Others? Doing more with social media, putting stories in the newspaper. Awesome.
Do any of you ever enter projects in the county fair? Because some of your reporting could definitely be a project that you entered. So if you
and guess what? You'd work on it all year and be done before fair. How cool would that be? There'd be no procrastinating.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Any other things? I see interviewing a former 4-H'er who, awesome. I really like that. Somebody who would join the military sharing about their 4-H background. A 4-H project on news reporting. Awesome. That's really cool, guys.
And then the secretary on his Thursday, and you should do.
Memes are funny.
They're really good.
Is it normal to get nervous while doing a project, like on a news report or something?
Absolutely. It can be something that you can be nervous about to do any project. I know that some of my projects I was most excited and passionate about when I was a 4-H'er were also some of the ones I was most nervous to share about.
Well, I get nervous about presenting things in front of other people, so.
You know, that is absolutely something that can happen when you when you share. I know I didn't always like to speak in front of people, and my experience was that the more that I did it in front of other people, like giving demonstrations at 4-H meetings, or talking to judges and doing performance, like I kept pushing myself to do some of the things that were hard, and then it got easier for me. But you know what? Even as an adult, there's times I still get nervous too.
So you have stage fright?
I don't know that I'd call it stage fright, but I get nervous. I get worried about if things are going to go the way I want them to, or if things are going to work right. Sometimes it doesn't, because you saw that tonight. We had some technical problems too. But you know, it's okay. we roll with it. Because that's what we do in 4-H. We adapt.
And to add to that, I am definitely a better writer than I am a speaker. So you can share your stories in different ways too. So if you are not comfortable with speaking in front of a group, share it in your writing or your picture taking.
Absolutely. That's an awesome thought, Greta. Thank you for sharing that.